expected. Expert level information, entertainment, education. Rev here, we got you covered as you hit your destination. Climate rules everything around me. Cream. For those who lost focus, close your eyes and just dream. Open your third eye, now the world is your off. Coolest show you know is the Hip Hop Caucus.
Greetings, family. Today's podcast is an opportunity to dig in the crates of our music and our history as folks focused on climate, energy, and the culture. We're here to celebrate the 10th year of Home, Heal Our Mother Earth, an incredible project which was an exploration of everything we love about our Earth home and the need for good music to represent our time in this struggle. It was in many ways before its time and was released as a part of the People's Climate March in 2014. I am Tamara Tolles O'Laughlin, and I am today's host of The Coolest Show with the incredible Reverend Lennox Yearwood.
Hey, good to be on the other side of the mic.
That's true. You do double dutch on the mic. That's for real. Today, I have the pleasure of talking with you about one of the many hats you wear. So today, we're going to touch on Home, which has 11 tracks featuring artists including Common, Neo, El Varner, Carmen, Raheem Devon, Crystal Waters, and so many other folks. Everybody who listens to this podcast knows and loves you, Rev. But they don't always think about the different hats you wear as the host of The Coolest Show, as the president of the Hip Hop Caucus, which turns 21 next year. She's going to be able to buy her own drinks. You and all the incredible producers of this show wear many hats in service to the movement.
Mm-hmm.
Can you jump in and tell the audience about the Home Project and why, as president, the Hip Hop Caucus took the step to advance the canon of movement music to include climate before it was cool?
Yeah, no, thank you. It's amazing how fast time goes. And 10 years has gone from the creation of the Home album, Heal Our Mother Earth. It was one clear goal for that, and that was to broaden the movement. Ultimately, it was, we look at the climate movement, or some people might say the climate collaboration. And in that, we looked at it and said, wow, this is a predominantly white collaboration at this time that wants to be a movement. And in that struggle at that time, this is a key time of mobilizing. You have to figure that President Barack Obama has been in office since 2009. He's now in the midst of his second term. And it's clear that, we had our Forward on Climate rallies and different things that are happening, but it's clear that the movement isn't broad. We had been working on issues regarding the Keystone XL pipeline, and we have been working in many areas across the country, uniting between Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities. But the culture, as far as getting mainstream and inviting other people outside of this movement to be a part of it, wasn't there. So Healing Mother Earth was created just for that very reason. It was created so that, and the idea, just the thought, was that let's bring together artists who we know, and let's bring them together. Shout out to all those who helped produce. Obviously, one of the producers is on this show, Juan Cross, and always Malik Youssef, and many, many others came together to help produce the album Home and called on their friends and allies to record music. Some of it was original music, some of it was covers, but most importantly was that if people saw an album that was predominantly done by people of color, that had people of color doing the music, doing some traditional quote unquote climate songs, Which Side Are You On, Big Yellow Taxi, and others, it was kind of known that that would be something that we could help broaden the movement. But it did broaden the movement, and there's a lot of things that came out of that. I actually think that work that we did, that work that Beyonce is now doing, is connected to the album Home. I think work that Rihanna is now doing is connected to the album Home. I think that we've had many, many other artists who are now doing work, who are from communities of color, doing music. But I also think it uncovered some things. I think it uncovered some things about this climate collaboration, this climate movement that we still need to work on today.
Thank you. Language, as you know, is a big part of how you build movements. There's a term that you use to describe um, art, this work, and the music as a tool, artivism. Can you explain what that means exactly and what it looks like in practice?
Yeah. So to me, it is when an artist who has been given a gift from the Almighty and they are using that gift from poetry and music and dance, um, whatever their gift may be, and they're using that gift to hopefully make this world a better place. And it is in that process that that artist begins to also become an activist, in the
Mm.
spirit of sometimes it's through their music, like Nina Simone, it's through their actions of supporting movement, like Harry Belafonte. It's challenging the system, like Eartha Kitt. It's speaking through their humor, like Dick Gregory, or just being cool as cool can be, like Sidney Poitier. But somehow those two things begin to come together, and they make that person what we call an artivist, meaning that they are fully artists and fully activists. That is what they do, and
Mhm.
they become a part of the movement. And so one of the things there, as they are a part of the movement, is that we begin to utilize their skill sets to help whatever they're fighting for. It could be fighting for climate justice, economic justice, democracy, racial justice, whatever it is. And they're using that skill. But what's very important about an artivist and somebody who is an artist, who is also an activist, is that they are bigger than this audience building. And I think that sometimes the
Mhm.
movement looks upon at artists just to help put butts in the seats, just to help bring awareness to what they're already doing. And that's such a cheap way because the reality is that they're missing the genius. And they miss it not only for them, but they're missing the culture, the connection. And so what we have on home, as an example, from the producers to the artists, we begin to have those who become artivists. So for instance, Anthony Smith is a good example. She came to this project not knowing anything about climate change. And but she was somebody who was from New Jersey. She understood from being involved with Superstorm Sandy. She understood some aspects of listening to what it meant to be around toxic and the smells of New Jersey. But when she learned that she got more involved, and as time went on, she became, an activist. And now she actually calls herself an artivist. She's one example. Dawn Richard is another example. Dawn Richard went through Hurricane Katrina, was actually part of Danny Kane, was a part of many other
Mhm.
groups at that time, and literally was homeless because of Hurricane Katrina. Was literally trying to get back home during that critical time, and then years later would then connect the dots that she wants to full time this work as an activist, but also full time wants to still be an artist. And then many folks we have around us here. I mean, obviously, Dewan Cross, one of our producers, Destiny, one of our other producers, both fully activists and
Alright.
fully artists. Trying to figure it out. But I think it's still something there where it's a difficult place to figure it out because I feel that the movement doesn't understand um, how to use artivists in the right way.
So twice, my friend, you baited me. First, you talked about the smells in New Jersey. As a girl from Brooklyn, I can't miss out on a good Jersey joke. So you grabbed me there. And then secondly, you talked about those moments where people are turned into their fullness
Hmm.
through an event. Now, as a good black mother, I was introducing my son to um, The Last Dragon last
Mm.
weekend
Wow.
because I need him to understand, you know, why he has to be showing off at Halloween with his curly hair. So we went through a whole conversation about it. And when we watched it, he asked me to explain the glow. And it sounds a lot like what you just defined in artivism, where are fully capable of operating in all of your gifts simultaneously. So that's what I
Yeah.
hear you saying, that artivism is you got that glow because
Yeah.
you can act without thinking in the full complement of what it is you can do, regardless of all the silos that get put up. And we talk a lot about that in this movement. We try to amplify the voices of people on this podcast. And frankly, this conversation about the album follows a long history of community led philanthropy. You touched on some of the greats that people know, who are thought leaders and luminaries, from conceptual artist David Hammonds to photographer Gordon Parks to
Hmm.
Harry
Hmm.
Belafonte, Jill Scott Heron, Audre Lorde, Mahalia Jackson, Aretha Franklin, who, at her funeral was described by Jesse Jackson as an artist who used her voice to deliver music to social justice, to deliver music for social justice. She was a fighter who used her art as a platform. Rev, can you talk a little bit about the music and the soundtrack of your own art as activism and how it created a soundtrack for movements that cross over into the mainstream when they have that glow?
Yeah, but we also add two more people to that list. It's a great list you just put there. People who I would say Michael Jackson, um,
Yes,
who
for sure.
who definitely was someone who right before he passed, we were actually working, trying to figure out ways to work more together on issues around climate. That was a huge loss because I think that he would have had a huge impact because he had already done. And obviously, there's a song on
Earth song.
Home, that Earth song that
Yeah.
Neo actually sings, that he put together, and then Prince. Prince, and I think Prince is important too because Prince is challenging both the system that he's
Yeah.
in about how artists are being paid, but he's also challenging other systems too as well, about and make sure that people are being included in that. I would also say that um, to be fully an artist means to be fully connected to your community. I don't think you can be an artist if you aren't linked to something else. And I think one of the things about
Mm,
artists is that artists become eternal because they leave things behind for every single generation to come behind them. And so they have something that's very different that many of us don't get to actually utilize. They put things out into the atmosphere, that actually have an impact. And when they put out junk into the atmosphere, it has an impact. And so when they're connected, it's connected. So for me, I think as someone who has worked with artists over these years, and I've seen a lot. I mean, and also being an artist brings you celebrity. It brings you a platform. It puts you in certain positions. It gives you money and resources, but it also brings a lot of things to you. And I think, and a lot of things that challenge you. I've seen a lot of sad things. I
mhm,
mean, to be honest, being around artists, I've seen artists who have had obviously tremendous trauma, tremendous pain. I mean, sometimes that pain and trauma actually helps them to create great things, but you see it
mhm,
and then they self medicate. One thing you do tomorrow is you do it climate critical, and you deal with that standpoint of helping to heal that. But artists deal with that, and I think also artists can hear things that other people can't
mhm,
hear. I think that what's going on around the world, what's happening with different crises, so many, from Gaza to the Congo to Haiti to so many different things around. I think artists have heard that and they hear it and they can't sleep. Actually, one of the things I realized too over my years, yeah, that's a great question you asked, because one thing I realized over my years that I realize now, I worry about artists. I've seen so many artists who come to
mm,
me who said, they want to quit this life because also they live differently, so
oh,
their life doesn't beat differently, but they want to quit this
mhm,
existence. And sometimes they come to me and
mm.
they're being used. They have managers or accountants or
Burnout.
friends. No, no, but it's people who are using because the gift is so bright. It's so
Yeah.
powerful. And then they face lonely, then they're lonely. So artists go through a lot. I don't think people understand how much, even famous people understand, even that they say, you mean they have all this, they're flying around and they ride around in these nice cars? Yes. Because the gift of being an artist. And then you double that with being an activist, someone who wants to create change. And you put those two things together and it makes them, like you said, the glow when they're
Yeah.
operating in that space. Oh my goodness. We actually don't have, there are very few humans who operate in the space of artivism.
So, Rev, I'll add one little asterisk, which is that as a person who has spent the bulk of a career building spaces where people who work in movement can hold this, I've seen a lot of creativity and beauty and
Mm,
art come out of just getting people from one end of the line to the other end of a line in a march can be a beautiful thing if your creative energy is in logistics and schematics and getting people like I know people who can get people through a blockade, but they can't make dinner and, like, it's a
mm,
thing of beauty, like, if you hold it
that's
that
real.
way.
That's real.
I come from a legal
Mm,
tradition, at my own wedding, which took longer than everyone expected
mm,
because I, over the course of my training, spent a lot of time collecting really well-written judgments from people who broadened people's rights and gave them capacity and wrote so much environmental
mm,
law. So many of those folks, if you look at the holdings, you could read it. It's like poetry. Like that's the
mm,
difference between the person who's just slamming the gavel and wearing the dress and the person who like can talk about your right to be able to marry whoever you love. Like if you read the holding in Lovin versus Virginia, there are parts of that that feel like poetry because it talks about every human being's right to make choice to have
mm,
love to be in a family. And so I do think that that stuff is put in a different box. And so part of what we're teasing out today is that we're talking about folks who are able to get beyond the boxes so that when they're operating in their gifts, that's not treated as transactional unless it's happening in secret, right? Because the thing that they're
mm.
so right at happens in front of folks. So I
No,
know
no, and
there's a big history of that.
that's why our movement suffers, right? Because what we're saying here
Yeah,
is that all that we've talked about the gifts and the glow and the
yeah,
ability to have these certain things you could do is missing.
yeah,
Imagine, I mean,
yeah,
and that what we do at the caucus or what we do in groups like us, because there are many groups like us, and who what they
yeah,
do
yeah,
is that they try to bring that in. And that's what home
yeah.
was. Home was simply like, listen,
Beautiful.
folks, you're missing something. Let us help you bring
Mm,
that in because if you add that to basically to not and not add, if it becomes a part of the DNA of the movement, not
yeah,
adding not
yeah,
somebody singing some bad songs at a rally, but really the DNA of this, and you have your best storytellers and your best artists
yeah,
and the folks who've been clearly gifted leading and talking about it, then this work wouldn't be so hard. But that's the thing. And then but folks think that they can do. That's what we know. That's what we do. People think that they can rap as
yeah.
good as Common or they can sing as good as
Uh,
Elvon or they can, they could do poetry like that. Just like a care more. And that's the thing that I think that people don't
yeah.
understand that yes, you probably are good at what you do, but there are those who have been given a gift that is undeniable.
Well, we're gonna dig into that because this is such a rich topic from like the history of this movement, climate, environment, and energy. Only because energy has a more public face. It's always been underneath the work, just like economics has been underneath the work. But we didn't have strategists working on it the way we do now.
Mm.
From Woody Guthrie to Joan Baez, Macklemore, Marvin Gaye, Curtis Mayfield, Bob Marley, Public Enemy to Black Star, Rage Against the Machine, and Dead Prez, we have a very rich history of music as protest as speech by the way of artistic expression. What do you think about today's movement music, if it exists?
Yeah, I mean, one thing I've always said that kind of helps me to navigate this question is when the movement is strong, the music is strong. But when the
Mm,
movement is weak, the music is weak. And so I actually
wow.
I flip it a little bit, and I say that when you see strong movement music, you'll see a strong movement that's right there.
Mm,
You'll see a movement that is around the time for the movement for Black lives or the movement for queer justice or the times when it was around issues around Standing Rock. When you see the movement, then you're going to there's a connection. But on the other hand, when you see weak music and music that is seems to be all over the place,
mm,
You can also find a movement that is usually weak and all over the place. And so I would say that
Wow.
in this process, one of the things that's there as we deal with that is that it wouldn't be so serious if movement music wasn't so important. And why it's important is this reason
Hmm.
is that it's important because it's used for mobilization, it's used for
That's right.
energizing, it's used for organizing. But even more important, movement music helps you to keep going on. Um,
Mm.
you know what I'm saying? That's the key thing. I'm gonna be all right. Is something that when you see things you probably should not have ever seen, that it allows for you to when you're by yourself to keep going on.
Hmm.
Movement music helps you to know you're not alone. And that's the one thing
Mm.
that it is eternal. I mean, Sam Cooke, you know what I'm saying? Change gonna come.
Yeah.
We still sing that and it means so much because it sticks to us. And I would say that we even you mentioned Aretha, RESPCT, show you what it
Yeah.
means to me. I mean, there's certain ways, James Brown, I'm black and I'm brown. I'm black and
Yes.
I'm proud.
Black
And
and
so
proud. That's her.
and so I think that there's music that to this day still means so much to us as a people, and we need that. And I wish artists understood. I know that there's a like with home and other things, there's something that doesn't want it to get out. So let's also we gotta be real about that. That there's something that
Yeah.
blocks,
We're gonna dig
that
into it.
doesn't want to support artists, doesn't want to support music that mobilizes. It actually wants you to be, it wants you to be in your fog. It wants you to be living but dead at the same time. And
Wow.
movement music brings you to life. It literally does. It touches your spirit. And anytime, I mean, I have seen people who have heard music and just start crying, weeping, 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 crying. Music can touch you in places and it can heal you in places that nothing else, that no balm, no ointment can touch.
Wow. I hear you saying that not enough people are making movement music. And I also hear some overtones about who the audience is for what is out there. What do movements do? Because you touched on it just now. What do movements do to encourage and integrate movement music? And what have they done on your watch to block it? So what do movements do to block good music or build on it?
Well, there's a fear. Um, Movements can encourage and begin to look at artists and help them as they are beginning to do their gift. They can help them when they're just starting out. They can create opportunities for them. They can put them out front in front of crowds. The black church was known for this. That's actually what, a lot of people would get their start, they
Yeah,
say, in the black
training ground.
church. They'd be like little 8-year-old, 12-year-old
Training
girl
ground.
singing in front the church. And that actually you're right, the training ground. And so the movement allows for that training ground. It doesn't do that as often as it used to, but that's one aspect. It allows for them to have an audience and folks to share their wares with. But this is what I think has happened. I think in the corporate aspect of this, the movement wants to use artists only
Mm,
for their gift. It is transactional. It is dirty. It is. It
mm.
is. It is to some degree. Um, and this is, please, I understand the term, and I say this with a trigger for those who are listening, but it is violating in many cases with artists. It is just to use their gift. It is extracting their gift, using it for their own personal goal, for their own business plan, their own quote unquote
Mm,
thing to motivate funders or whoever. And that's it. But no respect of the gift. And also no respect for where the gift came from, either from their ancestors or from their people or
mm.
from their land. and then no respect. The one thing I've noticed most than anything, that people don't give a damn where gifts come from. They don't give a damn. And all they care about is using it to prop up their agenda. No love,
Mm.
no help, no
So
support,
I hear you talking about
nothing.
I hear you talking about what happens when the music is an afterthought. Because we started off this conversation and it's the context for it. Can you talk a little bit about how you know that and the movement's
Yeah,
reaction to Home as a project?
yeah. So we
Because
create,
because I think for folks who know that story, this makes sense, but there might be people who are a little unaware of
yeah.
how you
So
know
let me,
what you know.
yeah. So we back in 2014, there was the climate conference COP 20 was going to be taking place in Paris,
Hmm.
and we had begun to do something from the French Quarter to Paris, and we began to organize and mobilize. Actually, it was yeah, it was 2014, and it was that
And
was
the
when
we
home
was
was.
the caucus, right?
You say what?
And the we was the caucus,
Yeah,
the
the
hip
we
hop
was the
caucus.
caucus. I actually want to make sure. So I think it was the
Mhm.
climate conference was 2015, if I'm not mistaken. Was it 20?
Okay.
I believe that. So we could correct that. But everybody at the time, it's about 10 years ago. It was 10 years ago.
All good.
So two
All
things that
good.
happened at the same time. There's this climate conference that we are beginning to want to bring more artists to, and there's also the creation of the music. And so we went to a number of funders to help us to get some resources. Now, normally, and people might not know the music business in this aspect, but getting one artist,
It takes money.
it takes a lot of money. And so we weren't at that time, the caucus was itself a new entity. It was only about 10 years old. And so we were fundraising for that. And shout out to Erin Rogers, who now runs the Hive Project, what is that Hewlett Foundation. But
Mhm.
she actually gave one of the first grants of some substance. And then obviously Ellen Dorsey with the Wall, was no longer there, but at the Wallace School Fund. But they came and gave some.
Yeah,
And actually
just retired.
they thought it'd be easy. They thought it would be easy. And at that time, where you at
Ah.
now tomorrow at EGA, they had us go to EGA at that time, and then we had to do all these presentations, and everybody was clapping and oh, that was beautiful. My God, we're gonna do a climate album and these artists, and we had got all the artists to sign on to it, and nobody really gave any money. It was nobody was giving any money. And so
Mm.
we had I think the whole budget was really less, it was six figures, 100,000 maybe to do a
Okay.
whole album with all these artists, and we decided to go for it. We said it was just so important. And that's one thing that I would say that's tough because that put a lot of strain not only on the organization, but on the artists, on relationships.
Mm.
Because people are like, how you in this $1 billion industry that's giving out money and y'all got nickels and dimes? It just was a weird situation. And so we went out, worked
That's so
over
weird.
hard. We had got Apple to put it on the iTunes page and all these different things. When we got it done, though, people were surprised. And were surprised at how good it was. They were surprised at all these.
Mm.
The one thing I had to give a shout out to Cross and many of the other producers. They actually they didn't cut corners. They created an album that was as good as any other album. They wasn't like nothing. What we immediately found out. This was my first big kind of awakening. I thought that okay, they're going to see the quality and see how good the album is and see how magnificent they have all these celebrities. And they didn't. Nobody was taking it. It was like they were giving like that's nice, but because
Mm.
they didn't control it, they was like, well, we're used to controlling those things. And then I also realized this tomorrow. I realized then probably the most something that probably upset me the most. I hope this doesn't offend anybody, but well, if it
I
does,
hope
I
I
mean,
hope it offends at least 3, 4, 7
yeah,
people. So hope it,
it may or
you
may
know.
not. But what I realized, and I hold on to this, is that the climate movement says it wants culture, but it
Mm.
already has a culture. And so what it's asking for people to do is not to bring their culture. It's asking people to have their culture join their already existing culture. And
Ah.
that's the thing and it's kind of invisible, but it's there. I always say it's like Birkenstock or
Mm.
I'm not against Birkenstock or Ben and Jerry's, but I just use that as a mechanism. And they already have their music. They say they want R&B or they want hip hop or they want pop. and they'll dance and say, "Oh, this is great." And they'll dance, and this is fantastic. But they already have their music. And so what
Mm.
happens there is that when we put on home, and because it was predominantly people of color, and it was hip hop and R&B and a little bit of jazz and people singing Marvin Gaye, they didn't want that. And so literally,
Mm.
in many cases, and especially one of the things there, and this is one thing for Antonique. Antonique actually, which is not a bad thing, but Antonique actually sang Marvin Gaye. Beautiful voice. One of the most amazing voices you're gonna imagine. But then they was telling her that to sing other songs, you need to sing from the Beatles, not Aretha Franklin. You got to sing Joan Baez, not from Eartha Kitt. And so you have to tell an artist that, okay, you're great, you're amazing, but you need to sing
Yeah.
songs that we know. And that's the thing that brings a kind of
Mm.
imposter syndrome to artists thinking that, well, it is really a movement for me. And that's why home began to feel the pushback. And now I'm so glad the Hip Hop Caucus could survive 20 years so that now we can tell the story.
I mean, I hear you talking about um replacement theory, right?
Hmm.
That like there is already a culture, and because it is steeped in an identity that carries itself as invisible. Like, I come from this work at the heart, head, and in the technical parts. And, one of the problems with so much of the climate legislation, litigation, all the politics that preceded this moment that we're in is that so much of it looked like it was written by an invisible hand, right? Like it didn't blame anybody
Hmm.
for the poison. Like the Cuyahoga River catches fire, and there might be a lawsuit with his specific blame, but mostly it's like, and the river caught fire. Well, somebody set it on fire by putting PCBs in it, right? Like somebody set it on fire by putting, tanning fluid in it. Like there's all these. You got to have real. You have to have a whole conversation, not just about the state of affairs, but how it got that way. And I hear you talking about that in the same way that the idea that diversity, equity, and inclusion is currently under fire in the work. It's because the problem comes in when you want to attach the whole story of how a thing exists, not just the part, not the part that's being handed to you. So I'm hearing you say that in order to have culture within climate that represents everybody, everybody has to be included. And so you were first, and like there was a whole period where solutions work in the movement was rejected because we hadn't quite
Mm.
explained the problem to people. So I hear a parallel in the same way that like
Yeah,
when you bring
yeah.
youth into the movement and they're unaffiliated, people say, "Who are those children? Why are they getting so many clicks and likes and why do they have all this ability we didn't train them?" So anything that
Mm,
comes from outside of the catalog or the academy or the canon, you know, try to put a black face on a cartoon character and people will come out the woodwork as though a cartoon character is has a race.
yeah.
So I
No,
hear you
no,
say
that's like
that
no,
people look
exactly.
and people are like, where's the pedigree? This isn't like it's why I
Mm,
put Woody Guthrie and Joan Baez in the conversation with Eartha Kitt and Rage Against the Machine. Like,
yeah.
those folks are Rage Against the Machine, you can't be at a protest where one of them isn't popping out the woodworks to offer some pizza and play some music. So like these aren't people who are figures in the past. Some of them roaming around. Like some of my favorite memories is like, oh, you're here again. This is great. Public Enemy being in the number one hip hop album of all time and the 50th anniversary. That's protest music. So like
Without a doubt,
it isn't
without a
actually
doubt.
a question of whether it's welcome, it's whether it's welcome in the culture of climate and environment.
But it's speaking
So
something even deeper though, Tamara. It's speaking something
yeah.
different because this is what happened. I see a lot of young people, particularly young people of color, who come into this movement and they are trying to figure things out. And this is why the problem is there's a culture that they're now trying to navigate, and they're thinking, well, I could bring my style, I can bring what I'm bringing, and it is true. They're bringing their gifts. The This is the problem, though. Unless they, unless, whew, unless what they're bringing can be controlled by somebody
By the
else,
canon. Yeah, by
almost
the
in a
academy.
form of progressive slavery. If it can't be controlled or at a moment's notice neutralized, it can't be used. And so when you bring your spirit, your music, you bring your authentic self, That is why you have to. Why I've said many times that sometimes this is not a movement; it's a collaboration, and that's very different. Two different things completely. And I say that because as we created the album Home, in that process,
Mm.
um, what we saw, and it's and we're breaking through the glass, but what we saw was that people are very patient and they will wait you out for your culture to go away, your problem to go away. So yes, they will pray with you and cry with you, even give you some money and hold you. But then 4 years later, past George Floyd, they don't want nothing to do with you. And that's devastating
Mm.
for somebody who's literally trying to fight for their people in their community. So we have to then look what we did at home, what we realize now is that we begin to create our own music. So we created, videos and films. So obviously we created Ancient Robert's Heat Wave. We created now Underwater Projects. There's other music that's being created. And we hope to create more music. But I think that's the thing that we need now. We need to actually be able to be in a position where I think the mistake that might have been made in this process was trusting people to actually think that what they were telling us about how good it was, that they actually believed that. And instead they were just saying
Mm.
that because it was just a thing to say. And unfortunate, because I would rather them be like, this ain't my kind of thing. I don't really know Common. I don't really know Neo. I don't really know these people. But it's funny now because now when they hear Beyonce or they hear Rihanna or they see whoever's doing something, they see Kalani or they see other artists, no name doing things for around cleanup or SZA or whoever. Then they want to get involved. How can we use them? Brad, do you know them? Do you know John Legend? Do you know John Baptiste? Do you know this one? After now, when they're at a pinnacle, but nothing to help that person build. It is the worst form of usatory that we need to change in this movement. Stop using
Some
artists. Stop using people for the moment. Let respect the gift. Respect the gift.
so I hear a little sharecropping.
Yeah, yeah,
Like,
without a
unless you
doubt.
unless you're indentured, you can't get through. I
Yeah.
hear I hear you talking about a wall of culture. So just to break it down for folks in the audience, culture are your customs, your beliefs, your social forms, your values, the conventions, the practices that become norms and standards, like not bringing raisin and putting it in a potato salad. Just things that you just don't do because the rules for how you step into the space have been set, maybe even before you were born.
Mm,
Like Black people, Indigenous people, all people of color with their own culture coming into the work run into a barrier of invisible culture that's integrated into the work. And it's exemplified by this lack of music, which also just means, if you ain't got enough season, the food's not great. Like I hear you, I hear you saying that. So in listening to you talk about this wall of culture and impacts, it also feels like it follows the evolution of turning social justice into a business, right? So all that great movement music we talking about Marvin Gaye, we're talking about Curtis Mayfield, like these are people whose talent could not be tamed even by their own lives. Bob Marley, like the stuff it outgrew everything that it
mm, mm.
that it was up against. I think even and outlived some of the people who made that work in their own lifetime. So talking about how has the work of social justice as it has become a business in climate and environment and energy and shown up as tactics of nonprofit and government and activism created a culture that has to be catered to instead of a culture that changes the work.
Yeah.
Like I hear you talking
Yeah.
about
Well, part
that
of the business,
pull, push and pull.
part of the business, um, and we have to break this, is in the oppression of our communities. We have sometimes we see a lot of this in our communities, activists when they create this kind of oppression Olympics, where they're fighting with one another to see
Yes.
who could be the worst. And then we also have this trauma porn that allows
Mm,
people to see they may not say it, but they have this fetish about seeing dead black bodies and hurting brown bodies
mhm.
and sick indigenous bodies. So when we talk about women, these camps that are set up up in North Dakota, South Dakota, and they say that these young girls are missing and raped. And yeah, people like
The man camp,
the man
missing murdered
camps, and
indigenous
then
women.
they did this, and then they go through, and then they hear that, and then there's just like there's this kind of like, tell me more. There's this vicious thing where you're listening, like, wait a minute, what you why you just want to wait? We want to get to the solutions. We want to get to, like Taboo, who's in the Black Eyed Peas, who we worked with. We want him to create music.
Mhm.
We want to work with Yo Nazaha. We want to work with there's so many phenomenal indigenous artists. We want them to create music. Why did you just want to hear about the trauma about who's being kidnapped? You just
Mm,
why you want us to put that on your PowerPoint presentation? Why is that something you just keep talking about? We don't want that. That's not what we want. That's not what we're not trying to fund money for you that way. Or, Cancer Alley. They want to hear how much, I mean, we want them to know people are getting sick. We want them to know. I
yeah.
want to solve the climate crisis more than anybody. It is everything that I commit my life to. At the same time, why do you just want to hear about how sick we are? Why aren't you doing everything we
Mm,
can to stop Exxon or Shell? Why is even and then to be honest, even when it hits your own communities, y'all don't move like you should. Why do you only why what's going on with that? And then when an artist sing about that, you tap your feet, you smile, you dance.
hmm.
But then when we dying, silence. Silence. There's nothing worse
So I hear
than
you
the
saying,
note of silence. There's nothing worse than
yeah, I
that.
call it violent silence.
Violent silence.
I hear you. Yes, violent silence. You can hear a pin drop.
Hmm.
I think I hear you saying that today's culture caters to a lack of diversity in a way that leaves the work without flavor, right?
No,
Como no
I
sabor.
I I think it caters to the fact that it's safe from the outside, and
Hmm.
the minute that it's apart, it changes. You see, I have no choice, no choice but to fight for my community. And all I'm saying is I wanna use every tool in my toolbox to stop this madness that is hurting not only my community, but the world. The thing though is that
So,
why are you stopping that? Why are you not allowing that to happen? And so I think that's the thing here. And so I would just say that where we are now with music is that I think with the Hip Hop Caucus to move forward, we've begun to change that. So even with underwater projects, we've begun to change that because one thing we've learned is that now we're taking this to our audience. We're taking it to our communities. And I
mm,
don't mean in a bad way. I'm just being honest. I'm just saying that we
yeah,
we've
yeah.
we've gone to certain film screenings around underwater projects. That's now, and people been upset because they figure there's too many people of color doing it. They don't understand why Wanda
Oh,
Sykes
wow.
doing it. Yeah, it's crazy. We've had people who literally 2024 saying there's too many black people. I mean, that's the question. Why you that doesn't let no climate moving. So it's okay. It's okay. It's okay. So we gotta go ahead and create. We need to go ahead and create music and poetry that will just help us to be liberated and to be free. We're gonna do it. We had no choice. And I love it. You know what I mean? I think that's where we are now. And I think that there are some who want to join that. Please come aboard. We're not keeping anybody away. But that's what we need now tomorrow. We need freedom music. Help us to
Yeah.
be free. We need to be fossil
I
free
mean,
right now.
I hear you. It feels like I also feel like when you referred to earlier about there was some questions in there, like who does today's culture cater to? Who is being protected and who's being left to die?
Mhm.
What are the goals of today's climate movement? Like if there's no music connected to clean air, if there's no music connected to clean water, there's no music demanding land back or climate reparations. Like if there's no music that puts the conflict in sharp relief in other ways to speak about it that cuts through the politics. When I think of voices that cut through the noise, I think of hip hop as an intervention. You
Most
know,
definitely.
like it exists, jazz as an intervention. It's not just singers and dancers and trained artists, but today's movement is full of um, folks with a form of self-taught genius, one kind or another. You know, they're TikTok heroes, they're influencers who have more media than they have friends, folks who found a way out of literally no way. You know, like during the pandemic, they in a house by themselves making things that amuse them and are able to cut through and reach 2, 3 million other people because of the lack of culture, the lack of accepting culture that you're talking about. Rev, for you, can you talk about the people within the movement that are shifting that culture? Because I think the audience needs to know, is there enough momentum in this version of the movement to get to artivism?
Yeah. No, I think there's a shift. Obviously, shout out to a lot of folks at the caucus who are doing some of that shifting. You mentioned earlier Anna Jane Joyner from Good Energy, doing on the Hollywood
Yeah.
side. Faviana up there in the Bay, connecting dots. There's so many. I'm gonna see what you're doing tomorrow. Different sides of this. There's a lot of artists. I think are using their skills. So I think on one hand, I mean, I definitely, I'm so encouraged that right now where we are, and I think that we need to organize. Oh, I mentioned Don Richard and many others, but
Mhm.
I think that we have to. I'm excited about how many artists, influencers you mentioned, who are connecting the dots. Regardless, I think that we need to. I think there's soon has to be a conference or a convening where we can bring everybody together.
Yeah.
I think that's very important around this, around culture and climate. And there are other convenings that are happening. Obviously, there's the Hollywood Climate Summit and other things that are happening. But I think there's something that has to be linked into particularly the Black, Brown,
Yeah.
and Indigenous experience. So I think that that's something that we need to look at. Um, so I think that I think there's a lot of things that are happening. But I would say that because of 20 years, the caucus is the beacon. I also would challenge the caucus. I think that the caucus, can't become, I mean, obviously they have leadership. I'm not quite in the same position I was,
Mm.
10, 15 years ago. So it's new leadership.
What do you
Thank
mean? Are you trying to say you don't staple every letter or lick
No,
every
I
envelope,
don't. I
make
don't
every
say
phone
school.
call anymore?
No, I don't.
Wait a minute.
No, I
Breaking
don't.
news, everybody.
Yeah,
Rev is not the person sending you these emails.
no, I'm not. There's a whole crew, but I would say to them at the caucus because they have become one of the premier entities. So I'm just going to say that, say it. They have to open the doors up though, that I think allow for
Mhm.
more artists and influencers to be a part of the process. I do think that that's. I do think I don't know how. I understand there's things that work within that process. I know they have other entities they have to work toward, but I do think that they need to be the ones who create the Broccoli City or the um,
Mhm.
Afro Tech. They have to create that from a climate cultural space that allows for the
Mm.
organizing, and I hope they do. I mean, I think that people would respond to that in a great way. So I think that's me challenging them, but I think others, and then they need to bring in others who are in this field. But I think that there's a lot more music to be created.
Yeah.
There's a lot more poetry that needs to come out, a lot more movies, documentaries that need to be done. And I'm excited to see because we have a short window to fix where we are. And I think the only way to do that is that um, I think that storytelling is the next demonstration.
Mm. Yeah, shout out to groups like Freedom Futures Collective
Most definitely.
out there building whole ciphers full of kids. You can
Yeah,
make
yeah.
music that brightens up your feed when you least expect it. I hear you saying that there is momentum. We just got to make a way for it to come through. That's what I hear you saying.
Yeah, no, I
Can
think
you
that
talk a little?
yeah, there's definitely
Can you
momentum.
talk? Can you talk a little bit about the kind of partnerships and opportunities that you see that exist for supporting artists and artivists to be?
I think this is where, and I've been wearing a little bit of a funding hat. I think this is where funders come in at. I think that funders need to, I think, fund this work at a higher level so that they can support
Mhm,
artists. I think that artists need incubators where they don't have to worry
mhm.
about paying their rent and and buying a sandwich and all that kind of stuff. I think that its movement is very serious about that. They should be taking artists in like fellows and supporting them, putting them together and letting them create in that aspect. So I think it's a resource question. I think there's an infrastructure
Mm,
process in which there's a space where they can gather. Shout out again to the Canic conversations and things that Don Richard is doing, many others doing. I think that there's a need
that's
for
right.
that. That needs to happen. I think also I think this is a global crisis, so we need to have global conversations with artists. I think that this artists just aren't here on
Mhm.
Turtle Island. I think we need to go to the continent, to the global south.
Yeah.
I think we have to go different places and embrace that artist and artistry too as well. And I think that's important. So
Mm,
I'm excited about the possibilities. I've been in this movement for so long. And I can tell you that I think that artists now are becoming more aware of the crisis that we're in and want to
that's right.
participate. So we need to make sure that we have every tool available for them to do that.
Well, Rev, I feel like there is I think for every activist, the worst question to end on is, "And what makes you feel hopeful?" So we're not gonna ask that.
Mm,
I feel like you started to speak to the folks who are waiting at the gate, who are already building their craft, who are not asking for permission, and the folks who are in the position to provide resources that makes that come through. We have a history of that. Like
that's
the
right.
revolution has always been resourced. There have always been people who have been benefactors, whether it's art that hangs in a gallery or art that hangs in the streets or music that's happening on the corner or green spaces where people perform their art, whether it's a speech or a song or a dance or performance art or the versions of that that show up on the internet. It feels like the future of artivism and movement is tied because they cannot survive without each other
That's
because it's
right.
how we express ourselves. Is there anything else you want to tell folks who maybe are being introduced to home for the first time through this series of conversations? What's your favorite song on the album?
Um, if God was one of us, just a care more. That's my favorite song. I mean, they're all
Yeah,
great. I also like obviously Common, you know, Show the Water, and I mean,
it's
I
hard
mean,
to pick. It's like picking
no,
between
no, no,
amongst
they're
children.
great. I mean, Raheem Devon, I mean, Crystal Waters, Children of the Ghetto. I mean, they're amazing. I would say there's 2 things. One thing I wanna make sure people heard what you just said. Again, I'll repeat it once again. When the movement is strong, the music is strong. But when the movement is weak, the music is weak. And,
Wow.
I wanna say that in creating Home, it opened up a pathway so that some giants, like from Rihanna to Beyonce, can be talking about climate. So for those artists who gave their spirit, those producers who gave their talents, you have opened up a pathway so other artists can walk in. And I want to say this to movement music. On November 7th, 2005, this is about 4 months after 3 months after Hurricane Katrina, which happened on August 29th, 2005. Our people during Hurricane Katrina were stopped on the Crescent City Connection Bridge. They weren't allowed to cross. They had been in the Superdome. It was 98 degrees. Our people were dying literally on the bridge, trying to get to Gretna, to get to higher ground, to get to water,
Mm,
to get to food, to have women needs and diapers. And they were denied. The Gretna City Police Department brought the dogs out in the police department and stopped people who were in their worst moment from crossing. And so we were going to cross that bridge. New Orleans still wasn't. It was rough. wasn't built. There was
Yeah.
not no place to stay. And I say this because we went there at Hurricane. I think it was Rita hit. So wherever that hurricane in between Katrina hit, so we couldn't go in September. We want to go in September. We want to go right there.
Mm.
So we had to wait till November 7th, and that was a time when it was. We used the date because that was the day a year before the upcoming election in 2006. November 7th, 2005. We went there to the convention center. It was some young
Mm.
people, folks who were still living. I mean, it was nothing, no lights, no power. We went there. Myself and many others went there. Ron Daniels, um,
Mhm.
Cynthia McKinney, who was in Congress. I mean, it was so many people who went. And why I'm bringing this up is because the Gretna City Police Department threatened our lives. They were like, somebody called up and says, "Y'all not gonna make crossing that bridge. If you lucky, you get across."
Wow.
And so we went to bed that night. Got the next day knowing our lives had been threatened. We got there to the spot and no power. We had to rally. Mama D, who's no longer with us, who was an amazing soul. Diane French Cole was there. And she had a shirt on that had holes in it. She didn't care. Everybody was still just trying to rebuild New Orleans. They was sweaty and grimy. I never will forget it. I looked up around and I didn't know if we had somebody who had a gun could have shot down at us. Didn't matter. I was like, we're gonna cross that bridge today. We're gonna cross that bridge today. I never forget it. Somebody had a pickup truck. They had put out some speakers on the back of that pickup truck. And right when we said we're gonna cross that bridge, I never forget it. It was fight the power. I never forget it. That started blaring from the back of that pickup truck. And the pickup truck went forward and we marched behind that pickup truck and we crossed that bridge. And every step of the way, I
Hey
never
now.
forget, it was listen, public enemy. We crossed that bridge with power, not worried about nothing. And that's what music would do. It'll help you cross those bridges. We got a lot of bridges to cross.
Wow.
We got a lot of bridges to cross.
Wow.
But let music guide your steps and crossing every bridge that you have to cross. And all power to the people.
Well, everybody, our guest today on The Kula Show is the Reverend Lennox Yearwood. And I'm Tamara Tolles O'Laughlin, filling in on The Kula Show. Thank you, everybody.